Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning, Mr. Mayor.
How
Morning,
are we
Mr.
all?
Mayor.
Sure, well, right.
See here.
Okay, colleagues, Andy is now with us, as are the officers and Councillor Slay. So I suggest we make a start. Okay. Can I welcome colleagues to the session of overview and scrutiny that is concerned with engaging, questioning the Mayor, having a conversation with the Mayor to really explore the budget both in terms of the investment programme, the overall budget that holds together the glue of the combined authority. Can I first of all have any apologies?
Yes, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Lucy Seymour Smith, Councillor Angus Lees, and Councillor.
I can't hear you, Lindsay. I don't know if that's me.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so as I was saying,
Yeah,
sorry, we've received 3 apologies: Councillor Lucy Seymour Smith, Councillor Angus Lees, and Councillor Stephen Simpkins. And currently you're not quorate, but we might have a few late joiners.
Okay, thank you for Tanya. Press off the meeting. No. Just
Councillor
so
Triggs,
members,
sorry,
you know,
I'm
if you
having
sorry, Chair,
difficulty.
can't
does
hear you.
actually have a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest to you, please feel free to either stick something in the chat box. You can't hear me.
We can't hear you, Chair. Sorry.
Hear me.
Yeah, Councillor Chalk, you're breaking up, Chair.
Hello? Okay, hang on. Yeah, we've got problems with our Sky has happily screwed up the Wi-Fi for the last couple of days. Is that any better,
No.
colleagues? Hang on.
No.
Where's my, that's for me to hear. Where's my mic? Can nobody hear me?
Not very easily.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just try and come out and come back in, okay?
That was stronger for me.
Yeah. I mean, whilst this is happening, I wonder, Councillor Baton, as Vice Chair, you could start the proceedings, or did you want to wait?
I mean, I can start if you like, because I mean, really, all it is taking the declarations of interest,
yeah,
and then moving on to the mayor's opening statement.
Yeah.
So quite happy to do that. So do we have any declarations of interest from anybody? I'm not seeing any hands. There's Councillor Akhtar.
Sorry, Chair, it's not the declaration of interest. I need to leave the meeting about 5 to 12 because I have to join another one.
All right, thank you for that. Just to make everybody aware, while we're waiting for Councillor Trickett to rejoin, we are being streamed live on YouTube, so it really does help in terms. Are you back, Lisa? Are you back, Lisa? No? Okay, so it really does help.
Is that better?
Not really.
I'm back, but it's not being heard, is it? Hello?
Hello. Shall I carry on and introduce the Mayor, and then you can try and sort out your connection?
Chair.
Yeah?
Could I just declare a non-pecuniary interest
You can.
relating to the Canal and River Trust that I'm on the advisory board, and also just again a non-pecuniary interest. I'm a former employee of Travelers.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bateman. Lisa, do you want to take back over? Lisa, are you? Okay, I'll carry on. So just for members in attendance, we are live on YouTube, so just bear that in mind, please, and also make sure that when you're not contributing that you do mute both your microphone and camera because of interference. So without further ado, and apologies for the slightly disjointed opening this morning, if we move straight on, Mr. Mayor, to your opening statement, and then we will come on to questions to the Mayor from members of the committee. So if I can hand over to you, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Baton, and good morning to everybody. And just so, of course, everybody knows, I know they do, but just for reminder that as in previous years, on this occasion, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Bob Slay, who has the finance portfolio, will help me with the questions. So we're looking forward to it. It's good timing. Because remember, the budget for next year is not yet formally set, so there's a real opportunity to influence here, and we've tried to make sure that you're well prepared for this to do that effectively. Just a few introductory comments from me, and I have to start actually with a big thanks to Councillor Slay and indeed all of the finance team, really, for two things which looked unlikely just a few months ago. You will have seen the projected outturn for this year for the WMCA's budget, and we are now projecting a balanced budget for the year. I won't dwell on that, but if there is anyone who wants to ask any questions about that, of course we will take them. But that does actually represent significant progress. When we presented our first forecast to the board, I think we were projecting to be 11 million adrift this year. So a lot of work has been done to cover that. Secondarily, in terms of next year's budget, I'm pleased to say the leaders, not the formal board, the leaders agreed with the, let's call it the framework of the budget, because the detail is still being worked through for next year, and that will also be showing a balanced picture. And again, an enormous amount of work has been done to get to that balanced picture, and given the huge challenges we face, particularly in the transport operational budget, where, as I'm sure you've picked up from the papers, we are 10.5 million at risk. Frankly, incredibly collaborative work has been done by everybody to bridge that gap. And so we will be able, subject to a bit of last work, to put to the board at the beginning of next year a balanced budget for next year, which is obviously critical given the situation we're in. And it's only right to say that's been a collective endeavour, thanking everyone for that. In terms of the capital, you will see from the papers that we are basically on track with our total capital expenditure of £2 billion. Inevitably, some programmes are running late, some aren't fully funded, etc., etc. And I'm sure there'll be questions about that. But the helicopter position is that given the challenge the economy faces, we are determined to continue with that scale of capital programme, because obviously there are jobs particularly as a result of that. And the element of it I particularly wanted to call out is, of course, the 1.3 billion of transport capital, which marks a huge step up, which is exactly what we said we'd do a few years ago to really begin to move at pace there. I'm also pleased, and I'm sure this will be called out as well, that there is enormous amount of evidence of leverage of using the CA's money to drive out private sector investment, so that 2 billion goes a lot further. And perhaps the best example of that is all of the work around housing, and particularly how we've used the land funds there. Nevertheless, there are some gaps in some of the budgets going forward, and I'm more than happy, we'll be really interested actually in the choices that lay around those and to talk about those over the next couple of hours. And then the penultimate thing I just wanted to say is as well to refer to the governance that lies behind this, because we talk about all the outcomes, but I think another really heartening thing, and again, Councillor Slade deserves a lot of the credit for this, is that as part of the original devolution deal, we were subject to a review, external review of how we were using our funding 3 years in. That has just been completed, and not a big song and dance of it was made, but it was in the investment board reports. It was conducted by SQW, and it gave us a good bill of health. And again, it's only fair to say that Linda Horn, the Audit and Risk Committee, everybody has done a good job to bring that about. And again, if that had been different, we'd be in a rather different position today. And then, of course, the last thing I wanted just to remind us of is the way in which we have tried, and I'm sure there'll be questions on this, to live up to a commitment to inclusive growth in everything that we do. All of the investment board decisions are looked at through that lens. All of our policy decisions at the WMCA board are looked through that lens. And I'm sure if we want to go into transport, housing, skills, they're all trying to address the inclusivity challenge that, of course, we know is even more acute now than it was before the pandemic hit. So that would be my overview, Councillor Baton. Very happy now to engage in any debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I can already see that I've got Councillor Grinsell indicating he would like to ask a question. So over to you, Councillor Grinsell.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning, Bob.
You've already referred to it in your opening statement, but we know that some local authorities are struggling to manage the budget. So assuming that you have managed to secure a balanced budget this year, can you comment on how you've achieved that, and will we be protecting activities such as transport, investment, skills and training? Thank you.
I will certainly do. I'm odd enough. I'm going to, well, not odd enough, correctly. I'm going to pass to Councillor Slade first, because he's been absolutely in the trenches with Linda on this. So I hope you won't mind hearing from another Solihull voice. So, Bob.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question, Bob. I mean, we have received a level of support, obviously, as the local authorities themselves have from governments. We've received a number of tranches of support, which I'm sure Linda will be able to put some detail into, with regard to the loss of fares due to the COVID impact, and that's continuing. And we've just, I think, agreed again to release further funding with regard to supporting the lack of patronage on both the bus and the metro services. We also took advantage, as local authorities did, of receiving some other grants from government, which we were allowed to utilise. That's the one that gave us 75% against lost income, the first 5% being absorbed by the combined authority. So we have received government support. However, the challenge, as always, is we've had to utilise our reserves. And so you will see from the report that you've got with it in front of you that we've had to do that. And of course, that is not necessarily sustainable in the long term. So that's why it's important that the medium-term financial plan gets the organisation into a sustainable financial position going forward. And that's the advantage of having this meeting with you today, to clearly influence the 2020, the 21-22 budget going forward. And I think that's really important, that we take the views of overview and scrutiny to understand what the implications are and how we're going to try and deal with those. But the position, as the Mayor quite rightly says, we're forecasting an £11 million deficit in the current year. We've now managed to produce a balanced budget, very much to the credit of Linda and her team, I might say, who've worked tirelessly to bring that about. But obviously, it doesn't alter the fact that sustainability going forward is the key objective. And I think within the overview and scrutiny report you've had, it does identify some of the risks within the budget and how we've actually dealt with them. I hope that that gives you an opening comfort. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And it's probably worth me adding just one thing, that we have worked very hard to make sure that in that balancing, all frontline services are protected. And indeed for next, and Linda's nodding at me, for next year as well, if you take something like our education budget, the work that we've put, the evidence around training, all of that is protected. Where we've looked at savings, it's been very much in the administration part of the operation or the support services. The frontline cash out is protected.
If I could just add, sorry, I didn't make the point. We are, of course, going through a transformation program at the moment, looking at the organisation coming post-COVID-19 to understand how the organisation works, and that work is ongoing. And I think we've identified already a potential saving of around about £1 million. Linda, perhaps you could nod. She is nodding. We've identified that we're going to try and save. Because obviously, if we make that saving in the base, that takes us into the future, and that's the important point. So we are looking at transforming the organisation going forward, and obviously working with all of our employees and everyone else.
Thank you. I can just see in the chat bar that Councillor Trickett is hopefully now back online. So Lisa, do you want to just take over and hopefully we can all hear you? We've got Councillor Dean Carroll to speak next.
Are you ready for me, Chair?
Just let's test Lisa's connectivity, and then I'll come in. We'll come into you, Dean.
Okay.
Lisa,
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, the sound.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, it's better now. Thank you.
Yeah, sound is better, but the screen is very blurred, so you might just want to do the volume. But if you want to take over, that's fine. That's great.
Okay. Shall I? Right, let me turn my screen off. Okay. Is that okay now, colleagues? Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better.
I could do with a yes or a no.
Yeah, that's much better, Lisa.
Okay. Okay. Kathy, I'm sorry, colleagues. So we've had the opening statement from the Mayor, and
we've had the
Deputy Mayor, and is this now the first round of questions?
We are now on to questions. We've just taken a question from Councillor Grinsell, and the next question is from Councillor Dean Carroll.
Okay, thank you. Dean.
Okay,
Dean.
you're ready for me, Chair. Thank you. I've got two questions, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Firstly, I appreciate it compared to the transport budget. I can appreciate that regeneration is a slightly smaller part of the combined authority's overall budget. But would you be able to give the committee an update on brownfield regeneration projects, please, and the brownfield first as opposed to green belt policy? And secondly, I don't know whether you're aware of the work of Midlands Connect and the Midlands Energy Hub, but I'm hoping that you would at least in principle be able to support their efforts to develop a strategic hydrogen refuelling network for hydrogen powered vehicles across the West Midlands region. They've identified 27 strategic sites across both the combined authorities, constituent members and non-constituent members. So those are the two questions: the brownfield regeneration and the hydrogen refuelling network. Thank you.
Wonderful. The second one I would not have put money on in the anticipating what was coming. So wonderful. Okay. So do you mind if I just pick a slight challenge with the very first thing you said, Councillor Carroll? Because it's not as big as the transport budget, but it's still an enormous amount of money in play here. The actual total cash that the Housing and Land Board governs, and then obviously is approved by the formal board under what they call the single commissioning framework, is now £625 million. So that is a lot of money, and that has come in different ways through the original devolution grant, the housing deal we did in 2018, and of course we've just had a further 84 million agreed through the Urban Transformation Fund. And right up to date, just on the numbers, we also are waiting for the outcome of a competition that each CA has entered into to MHCLG. There's 40 million further at stake here. We've bid for 30 million. I am optimistic of an outcome before Christmas, and top of the list of places to be addressed by that was Longbridge. So there's a very substantial sum of money. So you are right to ask. In terms of outcomes that are being achieved from it, the latest number we have for housing outputs is a few months old now, I'm afraid, is that we got to just short of 17,000 homes in the last year. That was a 40% increase over 2 years, and 85% of them were on brownfield. If you look at it in different ways, we can go through and call out lots of individual sites. The single biggest brownfield site remains Friar Park in Sandwell, but I genuinely think we've got a process momentum and it is working well. And that's what, frankly, why we've secured further funding from central government, that there's real belief that we've led the way on this. But the commercial element of brownfield is also very important. And actually, I will be honest in saying assembling the employment sites has been more testing. But we've got some brilliant examples, actually. And the one I would really call out is, of course, Phoenix 10, because we've just passed a critical milestone there. That is arguably the most polluted place in Britain. It is now got planning permission agreed. Sorry, that's not true. It's got the commercial contract agreed with the developer, Henry Boot, and the planning permission is now in with Walsall. So we're making enormous progress there. And I am very optimistic that we will see genuine regeneration in the ground there very shortly. So I'm very happy to answer any questions about any detail of it, but that would perhaps be the overview, that yes, we're more than achieving our committed targets. And the final piece of evidence of that, our targetry here is all subject to government scrutiny, and they only give the money when we prove what we've done. And we've actually just had that scrutiny. We've passed all the measures, and further cash will actually be paid into our accounts in January as a result.
Can I just add, if you look at the table that's been supplied to you as members on the Brownfield Land and Property Development Fund, you'll see that on 17 projects we've created 2,502 jobs. We've remediated 142 acres of brownfield land, and that's in itself created 820 new homes for people. I think what you need to understand is with both of those funds, the SIF and the brownfield, and the brownfield is predominantly grant, by the way, but the SIF fund particularly is actually supporting a failed market. So those sites would just not be developed if the combined authority actually wasn't able to put the funds in, because the commercial sector will not fund those developments. And that's the really important point about why the combined authority is achieving what it should do with regard to delivery on some of the outputs that we want, because I can guarantee no private bank will actually invest in those sites, and that's why we as a combined authority take the opportunity to support that failed market. So I think the CIF and the Brownfield Land Property Development Fund are two clear examples of just what the combined authority does to try and develop the West Midlands both economically and particularly to give people homes.
Is that okay, Dean, or shall I move on to your second question?
Yep.
Can I just clarify? Can I seek some clarification there? Because again, you reference a failing market, and if I was to look at the revolving investment fund, half of that has gone into a canal side multi-million-pound development. Island development, where with townhouses starting at 330,000, 2 car parking spaces. This is a mile down the road from bed and breakfast hostels, hotels that are taking families from all across this region. When I measure success, what I'm interested in from your investment in brownfield, how have you actually really secured a failing market? Because for me, at the moment, where the region is failing is access to housing that people in this region can afford.
Okay, with pleasure. So, and Councillor Slade might like to come in as well, but he raised the market failure term. But let me just be extremely blunt. I am more than happy. We list every one of the developments that have been done with that fund and say, how long has that space been vacant? and on average, it's about 20 years. The Port Loop development to which you are referring has probably been vacant for 30 years. Certainly, the one that I referred to at Phoenix 10 has been vacant for that sort of length of time. So there could not be a better demonstration of market failure than the fact that they have sat literally idle within 3 miles of the city centre in the Port Loop case for that length of time. I mean, that to me just screams market failure. Now, in terms of how we have made sure that that money is genuinely generating affordable homes, very, very clear, and I think this is something the Combined Authority should be proud of, that it has been absolutely resolute in saying no public cash will be put into a development that does not deliver 20% affordable homes. And we have also been the first place in the country to redefine affordable. So affordable in the West Midlands CA word is now related to incomes, not related to market value of property. And that makes a huge difference, because if you think at the moment, incomes are going backwards and property values are going up. So the notion of affordable in the government definition of across the country would be going up. Here it would be going down. So I genuinely think within the ability that we have acted decisively to change how that is working. And there are schemes which had a lower affordability proportion given planning consent from their respective local authority. And because they then applied to the CA for funding, the affordability percentage has gone up.
I think what we have to then be very clear about, and again, developments fail partly because developers sit on them and they sit on the land and they look for the land escalation. And one of the ways that actually the Combined Authority can secure a good return for its investment is to take a share in the uplift. Now, on the private developments, it doesn't seem to be taking a share in the uplift. However, we called in 3 weeks ago, an affordable housing vehicle that the Combined Authority was looking to take a 27% return on, was looking for an overall vehicle with a 27% return, and hadn't mentioned once the word social housing. So again, I suppose it comes back to measurements of success. Do you measure success as, lovely island homes for the wealthy, or do you measure success about creating a sustainable housing base and you use the term regeneration, Mr. Mayor. What the Combined Authority is doing at the moment, in my mind, with its investment is not regeneration, it's development, it's subsidised development. It's not even trickle down, it's trickle up, especially when you are looking at a 27% return on a joint venture with affordable housing delivery partners.
Okay, so
can we take some questions?
Should I not just answer Dean Carroll's second question? Should I just answer Jean Carroll's second question?
The hydrogen.
Because Dean asked a question, simple question. Do we support both the Midlands Connect and Midlands Energy Hub? And this can be relatively straightforward because the answer is categorically yes on both. Midlands Connect, for example, the work on the Midlands Rail Hub, which they are promoting, is critical to increase capacity into the city, into the Birmingham city centre stations. And on the Midlands Energy Hub, we're not just supporting it. I think it'd be fair to say we're co-writing it actually through Energy Capital, which obviously is, I'll call it an arm's length body of the CA. So categorically yes to both. And in what we have put in our sort of energy devolution deal to BEIS, we're working hand in glove with those organisations.
Okay, can I just, sorry, I will come back on my point raised. Do you think 27% is a reasonable return for a joint venture on affordable housing?
I think as my understanding was that you asked the Housing and Land Board to look again at what was being done. That's exactly what they're doing, and I am letting that process happen. But what I am absolutely sure of is that our intention of working with housing associations is absolutely laudable. It is the right thing for the combined authority to be doing, because we're trying to accelerate the pace at which they deliver homes. And to your wider question, we are doing regeneration. I reject what you say. I think you just go and look at Phoenix 10 as a classic example of this. And I also believe that we are measuring our success both by total homes and affordable homes within that total.
Okay, we can argue about this all day, can't we? But where we have people in this region on casual contracts, in low skilled, low paid jobs, who are actually furloughed, 500,000 people furloughed. What have you done, Mr. Mayor, since you have been mayor, to secure housing opportunity for those people?
We have ensured that in this region has built homes much more rapidly than was being done before. No question, that's not just my view, the data is clear. We have increased the rate by 40%, it is true, by 40% in 2 years, by 100% in 5 years. Categorically true. And within that, the proportion of affordable has gone up. That is definitely helping people on basic salaries move into homes.
Okay, I will point out that pipeline in development means that anything that comes through now was potentially planned 5 years ago before the combined authority. Kathy, you wanted to come in, my love.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, if I can just sort of take us back to the presentation that we received in preparation for this meeting, Mr. Mayor. So it's highlighted that 21-22 current portfolio activity cannot be sustained without funding being secured.
Correct.
My question is in two parts. So where is that money coming from, given that local authorities are so cash strapped in terms of increased 20 levies, and given the fact that central government are not giving us the ability to plan longer term because we're not getting that information through. We've acknowledged that the advice changes on a daily basis. And what is the plan B?
Yeah, okay, so great question, thank you. So I'm just looking for, you can probably tell me exactly which slide it is on, Linda. There is a slide that shows the sources of our income in your briefing pack. I'm just flicking through for the number of that pack. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll do it without
Slide
referring
19.
to the page. Sorry?
I think it might be slide 19.
Because it's actually very important.
Probably about page 8 or 9 on the pack that you have, Mr. Mayor. I think it's just while the Mayor's looking for that, I think just so I'm clear for everybody, when we're talking about next year, we are proposing a balanced budget for next year. So we have plugged next year's budget with use of reserves, the gap that's in there, and we are taking the budget forward, acknowledging a certain level of risk. So actually the sustainability issue is not one for next year. What we're highlighting is the need for the authority to continue to work with government during next year about getting the mayoral combined authorities on a more sustainable footing from the following financial year, from 22-23.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, reserves can only be used once.
Yeah.
And they're gone. We need to understand what the plan B is for that point. Thank you.
So let's come to your question.
So slide
directly.
9.
Yeah, or on page 5 of the briefing pack. Either way, it's the one with all the wheels on it was the one I was looking for, because that describes it really very, very clearly and draws the issue out, Councillor Baton. So it shows there, if you've got page 5 of the briefing pack with the circles in it, it shows that the constituent fees, coming to your point about local authorities being cash strapped, that 4.6 million. It is, and that number is fixed. And for non-constituents, it's never changed all the way through. So we're absolutely acknowledging in the next year's budget that we're not asking existing local authorities to pay a penny more. So acknowledging your point. What it also does then in the other circles is show you the sources of the cash, to come straight to your question. So you see the single biggest item, and frankly, it's in and straight out, is the AEB grant. Then we've got the transport levy, etc., etc. And we're also assuming the transport levy, which comes from local authorities, is also kept flat. And that will be the third year of it being flat. So the simple point trying to draw out here is we are recognising the point that you make, which is our local authorities are very stretched. An area where we will see growth, or have seen growth in recent years, has been the business rates growth. And that was agreed in 2016, that the upside in business rate growth we got. And the other point, of course, is where it talks about other DEBO grants. That's another area where we've seen grow. It's 3.2%, but it's actually an extremely helpful element. And that's where we managed to secure from government funding to do particular activities. And then so the staffing is paid for effectively directly by the grant. But hopefully, Kathy, that briefing shows you exactly the sources of the cash. So we have to run within that balance, basically.
Yeah, I take that.
Can we come back to those circles? Because Kathy, can I just authority? Local authorities actually contribute £126 million. We are by far, if you look at the what we hand over in terms of the levy, our constituent fees, and also the business rate uplift, which we explored last year, because actually the business rate uplift is just an agreed formula between the local authorities. It doesn't actually relate to business rates uplift. And we did raise as a scrutiny a concern about using that term, because it implies a growth that has not necessarily been there. And certainly this year, we all know growth has been something very hard to secure. So whichever way we look at it, Mr. Mayor, the local authorities are your largest single contributor to West Midlands Combined Authority funding. If you add on top of that now the fact that the costs borne by local government have not been covered by the government, and we are actually going to have to cut services because we have not been compensated for what we've actually paid out to keep the show on the road for COVID. And you look at the comprehensive spending review that is saying that we have 5% increase on council tax. It is again, when you look at the deprived profile of our region, it is the poorest members of our communities who are paying for the luxury of Port Loop, who are paying for the luxury of other projects that go forward. What we are wanting to understand is what is the return for our citizens, and how is this going to be viable as a budget going forward? I have also a concern in terms of the viability of the budget, because going back to slide 9, sorry, not the bubbles one, the one before, what blew my mind when Linda took us through these slides was I'd always assumed the Get Building money was coming into the Combined Authority, was transparent, accountable, and totally overseen by the Combined Authority because you'd held it as money for the Combined Authority. It doesn't, we don't even have any, there's no accountability to the Combined Authority, it goes straight out of the left. Whichever way we look at it, there does not seem to be a sustainable base to Metro Combined Authority areas. And that has to be a massive concern, I would have thought.
So
sorry, Kathy, I just wanted to bring that point in.
You've got lots in there. Let's try to unpick a fair bit of it. So the first thing to say, and we probably shouldn't go back round the whole Port Loop thing, but the Port Loop budget is not incorporated in this. There's a difference in the revenue and the capital. This is talking about the revenue budgets, but we have already dealt, I think, and we have different views as to whether that is an appropriate use of capital. It's
about what the Combined Authority does, Mr. Mayor. It is
and we've covered
Combined Authority's purpose in its totality.
But we've covered the fact that you and I have different views about Port Loop, but it is not right to say that Port Loop is anywhere within these circles. Now, these circles are about the revenue budget, and you're right to say the biggest source of the revenue is our local authorities. But to answer your question head on, what are the local authorities getting for their disadvantaged communities? You look to the levy, and a huge part of the levy is going on all of the transport concessions, which are there entirely to give more opportunities for disadvantaged members of society. So it is an absolute classic answer to your question. That is what communities are getting for paying that levy. And when you come to the sustainability bit, and I suspect this is an area where we will agree, given the budget challenges next year, we don't want to put the levy up, we understand that, but the operational transport challenges lead to difficult choices about whether all of those concessions can be sustained. I am absolutely determined to sustain them because they're needed by communities, and that is an absolute classic of how the combined authority, through its power to bring everyone together and provide one deal with National Express and other operators, provide services to our communities.
And your budget in terms of your 66 million and your ability to connect through, is that combined authority money?
The Great Britain Building Fund, we were very clear on that. That's national government money. It's always been national government money. The way it came into the region was that, and again, this was very clear, it came through a combination of the Mayoral CA and the LEPs. We were the people who were asked by government to make the bid. Brilliant collaboration work was done, frankly, to make sure that all the bids met regional and sub-regional targets. And we have very swiftly pass that out to each body that is actually responsible for each project. So for the National Brownfield Institution in Wolverhampton, the body is the University of Wolverhampton, and that has been an efficient way of doing things. So there's no overhead in that. They're the accountable body, they're dealing with it.
Okay, we can come back to that. Kathy, sorry, I interrupted you. Had you got anything you wish to come back to?
No, Chair, I think if we move on to Kate Wild, who's been indicating.
Yeah. So can we try and stick on the sort of sustainability of the budget for now, so we can just focus down on those key areas? Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Sorry about that. Kate. It was a derivation. My questions are actually, it's in two parts. And the first part is to say that I understand that there was a recent independent evaluation of the WMCA investment programme. Can you share details of this with reference to how the WMCA scored in this evaluation, please?
Yeah, with pleasure. So I'm actually going to let Bob answer the detail of it because he presided over the investment board that took the report. But the headline, just so everybody knows exactly what we're talking about, is that in the original devolution deal, we committed to have this inspection on behalf of government 3 years in. That has now been completed. It was done on behalf of government by an organisation called SQW. The headline would be that we scored extremely well, actually, and the credit is down to the procedures around the investment board. So I'm going to let Councillor Slate answer that question.
Yeah, the SQW report, which we have responded to, I think does have a RAG rating with some of the outcomes required. And I think if you read it, and it's fairly extensive, I think there are 6 separate reports in all. You will see that the combined authority, I think, came out quite well with regard to how it's utilising its investment programme. They did see the investment board as being a regional investment body and was therefore spreading the investments widely across the region. So I think the report should be read in some detail to understand exactly what we did. They did, of course, take some case studies to actually look at whether they were meeting the outcomes and the outputs required. And again, I think that the ones that I read some again this morning, do indicate that the outputs that we required through those investments were met within the evaluation by SQW. I mean, the SQW report is critical because obviously that's the first 5-year gateway review that we've gone through, and that will therefore go back to government to confirm whether the quantum of funding that we receive from government on an annual basis is to continue. But I think if you read the report, it'd be a great surprise if that was not the case going forward. So I think that's probably as much as I can say, but it is a very long document and there's 6 separate documents within it. So, and we have responded. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
So it certainly does. If I may, Chair, I'd just like to continue along the investment lines because, of course, the investment does affect sustainability of any project. Management of the WMCA revenue and expenditure is part of the financial responsibility and the Mayoral financial responsibility. In other words, Mr. Mayor, your responsibility and your team. But so is securing investment in the WMCA. What's your response to the recent government announcement in the CSR, and how do you think they have the potential to improve the West Midlands, please?
Yeah, okay, interesting. So you are right that, again, we're very focused on these circles because that's the ongoing revenue funding. But actually, a lot of the activity that either the WMCA does directly or does in partnership with other organisations does not come through these circles at all. Let's take a lot of the housing money is not included in that at all. A lot of the transport capital is not included in that, and we will get separate investment agreements with central government. You're absolutely right, Councillor Wild. And just another example that we haven't talked about at all, the funding that we got for central government for the 5G piece, that's not included in this at all. And I think actually the record of the CA over the last 3 years has been good in this respect. Before the pandemic hit, rate of it, we had achieved, I think, £2.7 billion of investment that is not about these circles here, capital sums to be spent. And that's not my number. That number was given by the finance function there. That's actually continued through the pandemic, but we haven't sort of changed that number publicly because it's come slightly differently. But the CSR was therefore very important because there were some really major new funding streams announced then. The most important of all was actually the fully devolved transport package. And they talked about 4.2 billion between the CAs. And now our share of that per head of population is £800 million. That's the single biggest investment we have ever won. It's available from April 2022. We shouldn't all get too excited and spend it all rashly too soon, but it is actually a very large sum of money that is going to be fully devolved. And the reason it's so significant, if elsewhere in your briefing package shows the capital investment in transport per year. And next year is actually the peak, and then it shows it falling away because basically we'd spent the money we'd previously got. This new amount of money, 800 million, will allow us to be really careful in how we think about that, but it will push those transport investments up very substantially. So of all the things in the CSR, that one, which was hidden in the small print of the CSR, is actually by far and away the most significant to us. Hopefully that answers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just come back to that, because I always have problems with these investment programs, as you're aware, because again, the original investment was 2.2 billion. That was then not sustainable, so we came down to a core investment program of 800 million. And then I appreciate there are broader investment programs that you influence. And again, I think I'm on the record as saying the most important thing I think for the combined authority is its capacity to influence. But what we also know is when we look at those funds, there's huge RAG ratings, red and yellow, amber scores against them for non-delivery. And the response we got back from finance was they have no definitive information, that these aren't funds that are in our control, and we can't actually know whether they're actually delivered or not. So I accept the importance of influence, but actually through that influence there needs to be accountability. And if we don't actually have some coherent feedback loop and understanding of what's happening with the delivery, then there is a problem. What I'm also concerned about clearly, and I don't know if it was picked up in the programme, is the fact that we told the public there was a £2 billion programme and there's only 800 million. and that we also have a massive issue about delivery on some of the programmes we have. You know, over £100 million of programmes that have been delayed. Now, I know COVID plays its part, but there is huge delay built in to those programmes, and that is huge delay in the jobs that will come out at the end. And again, nobody faults the assurance processes of the combined authority. The governance review said it's a well-managed, well-run combined authority. What we have concern about is actually what is real. We have millions and millions constantly being announced, but when we get to the bottom of it, your core programme is 800 million and your delivery delays are over 100 million.
Okay, thank you for asking the question, because I do know that people get confused about this. So let me try to explain some of this. And for the first time today, I'll say, Linda, if I don't get it completely right, please jump in, because it's fair, the question. You are right that we talked about 2 billion of local investment programme when the combined authority was set up. You're also right to say that investment programme, as it was called, has become 801 million agreed. And actually, in terms of transparency, the status of every single project within that 801 is all listed in the documents you've had for this. So you can see whether it's spent or not, and indeed whether each project within it is fully funded. So that's all utterly transparent. But on top of that 801, there are lots of other funds that we actually do control directly. It's not just the influencing. And we've talked about the biggest one, of course, housing, 625. So that's why, and this is where I think it gets a bit confusing, we talk about a current £2 billion investment programme for the CA, because when you add up all those other things, it comes back to broadly that £2 billion number. But you're right, Councillor Trickett, it is different to the 2 billion that was first talked about. And I understand that can be a bit tricky. Now, in terms of the delays, let's just be clear. I think there can be two things meant by that. And I will choose two examples, again, to be completely transparent. There are some projects in the 801 that are fully funded, but we haven't spent the money yet. And the single biggest example of that would be the city centre regeneration in Coventry, £95 million. It is sitting there waiting to be spent. But what the board has done, and all the leaders took part in a workshop to agree this, was look to see whether it was right to continue to hold the money for those things in the future. Because it would be quite legitimate to say, no, we don't want to hang on to that money, we want to spend it on something different. But the unanimous view of the leaders, and there's a critical point here, it's not just me and Councillor Slay, all the leaders, was that we stuck to those items where we were not yet spending the money. And if you take the Coventry City Centre one, I certainly think that's the right decision, because it will be genuinely transformational. There are other items, and again, we're very transparent about it, and more than happy if you want to call any of them out for scrutiny, where we have said we will do it, but we don't yet have all of the cash, or we have a part of it. And a really good example of that would be Dudley Interchange, where we needed, the number's still moving about a bit, but let's say we needed 17 million and we have 10 million at the moment. So there's a 7 million shortfall. Nobody's hiding that. And what we have still to do is to find that missing money. And there are a number of projects which are in that category. But I think the critical thing to draw out there is that probably isn't unusual for how big infrastructure projects work. And it doesn't mean you can't continue the work towards it. And what we've got to do is, by the time we get to a critical go, no-go point, we've obviously got to have found that money. So hopefully that explains some of the dynamics. And have I described that accurately, Linda, or is there anything you'd wish to add?
Yeah, no, that's fine for me, unless there's any further questions on it.
Fine.
I mean, again, I will come back to this in transport questions, because again, I'm intrigued where the briefing papers have shown key areas where there have been announcements and indeed films made where we still seem to not actually have the money, including, say, Moseley Station, Sturchy Station. And my concerns there come back to also that we spend money on the frost and the big announcements, but we don't actually do the basic work. And what I still keep on coming back to is, in all of these millions, what's there for the hairdresser? What's there for the man in the van? What is there for the people of our city? Can I ask Penny to come in, then Kathy Baton, and then Jackie, because I want to go back to the train stations and ask more questions when I'm not chairing.
Thank you, Chair. Just for those who don't know me, Councillor Penny Holbrook from Birmingham. I'm actually just subbing in for Lucy Seymour Smith. So if you feel this question isn't appropriate, by all means, just tell me and I won't be offended. I'm very hard to offend. What I am interested in is, and I'm picking this up from last night as a last minute substitute, so forgive any lack of knowledge. I noticed in the report that there's some funding that's been made available for upscaling job centre plus centres, and also some schools infrastructure money that has gone towards improving schools. I believe that's what I've read in the report. I might be wrong. But what I am interested in, my real question is, we're doing so well on transport, we're improving connectivity, if we wish to take that view. But actually, after suffering through COVID, my point is, what are we improving it for? What are we doing around skills and education? Because our region suffers a huge amount, our whole combined authority, everybody, suffers a huge amount from our own people not being able to get into the highest skilled jobs. And that's not going to get any better after COVID, because people are losing the jobs that they had. You know, schools and colleges and universities have been in different situations. And I'm really concerned about what pipeline planning we're doing and what pipeline budget planning we're doing about trying to ease that, because we can have the best transport in the world, we can have the best housing in the world, but if we haven't got people who can afford to live in those houses and use that transport to get to work and jobs that are meaningful and are going to reward them, I'm not really sure what the point of it is. So I suppose my question really is, I see a little bit in the budget about skills and employment, and if it's not the remit, please accept my apologies. But I do think it's a fundamental to what we should be doing, is ensuring that people have access to good quality training, and not just people who are already on the path. You know, we need to be uplifting all of our residents into higher paid jobs, because ultimately we won't be getting any money if nobody's got a job and paying any taxes. So I suppose that's my question, is what are we doing around that? Apologies if it's inappropriate.
No, Penny, lovely to hear from you, and it's entirely appropriate. So I will just say one little detail, one thing you said though. I'm not aware that we have a budget for improving schools. I'm not sure where you've got, and Bob's shaking his head at me as well. I'm not sure where you've got that from. We have not had any responsibility for that piece. So
I may have misread the report, because I will admit I very briefly skimmed it.
Don't worry.
Picked it up last night.
Because your core point is very entirely fair. So clearly, the big capital projects around transport have a much longer lead time, and you've kindly acknowledged that we're making progress on that. And I'm absolutely determined we press on with that despite COVID, because we have to plan in that sense for the recovery. But moving to your core point, so the way we have been trying to approach this, because it's become the biggest issue by far in the region, the increase in those claiming benefits through COVID. And of course, we're in a so much better position pre-COVID. So the approach has been that we've tried to do two things. First, we've tried to make sure the cash that we have got directly, so that is largely our education budget, is put to use to reskill where we can. And secondarily, what we've tried to do is make sure that those who have got far bigger budgets than us, our colleges, our universities, that their work is providing the skills that will be needed for our new economy. So a really good practical example of that was 2 days ago, we launched the sector-based work academies, the 20 colleges across the West Midlands coming together with us, one offer to, I'll say younger, not just youth, younger people across the region, and the courses that are in there are directly relevant to the growth areas rather than the contraction areas. We're the first region of the country to have done that in that way. And the CA's role there was very much the sort of facilitator linchpin to make sure that happened in line with our industrial strategy. And it probably also worth saying, and this is sounds a bit bureaucratic, Penny, the other thing that has been done is we have now moved with all the constituent authority leaders' enthusiasm to a skills and jobs delivery board, which is actually having its first session today, led by Councillor Brookfield from Wolverhampton, which is very much on the how do we deal with the immediate issues. We've started some of it, like the youth platform, the youth hubs, but there needs to be much more around that, Penny, if that's fair.
Okay, I think I'd just add for clarification, I've picked that comment about schools up from slide 5 in my pack, and it may refer to somebody else's funding, but it's 1.8 billion going into schools infrastructure. I may have misinterpreted where that funding comes from.
That's that's national government funding. Yeah, I understand now. Yeah.
But I suppose my ask would be that as we go forward, as difficult as the budget is going to be, as much money as can be redirected to skills and employment is going to be essential, because we're looking at an entire generation of people who are either in work and going to be struggling to find work again. I mean, it's the same in every city, in every region. It's not just Birmingham. We've obviously lost some major retailers, and a lot of our economy was based on that. Interestingly, we're importing jobs that are higher skilled, but we're not getting our own residents into those jobs. And I imagine that's similar across most people's, conurbations.
Can we also pick up, Mr. Mayor? I think the sector-based academies are a really laudable step forward, and indeed skills is where actually the combined authority has shown the value of having that cross-authority commissioning potential. Where obviously there are massive concerns will be Brexit and ESF funding. We were promised shared prosperity fund. I don't think I've seen that coming over the hill unless I blinked and missed it. I don't think I saw anything in the comprehensive spending review. And then last night we are told by the Prime Minister, look forward to an Australian deal, which if I go out and talk to some of the businesses in my patch, they will not be looking forward to. So I'm worried about how secure some of the established skills that we're doing. That put funding into these the 66 Building Back Better shovel-ready schemes. Actually, it's the people that we should be investing in, and it comes back to government not trusting us to give the money we need, give us the money to do what we need to do.
But sorry, Chair, they did cut out for me a little in the middle, and I think by 1 or 2 other people's faces did as well. But I think I got what you said, Lisa. So 2 responses. The first bit on the Shared Prosperity Fund. You're right. We've been waiting for this for a long time. It was in the CSR. I was just trying to remember if it was the Chancellor's speech or in the small print, but it was. And what it said was that there would be a pilot this coming year, and then it would develop up and get to the commitment that was given that it would be broadly similar to the level that the EU are currently spending. But you are right to say, although that commitment was there, the announcement was there, the amount of cash was there, we do not yet know exactly how that is going to come and when. And I would agree with you, and this has been in all of our CSR documentation, our budget documentation earlier on, that we do need to know that, because it's been a critical part of our infrastructure, our systems over the last, decades. So we still don't have the final detail, but there was a commitment to the funding from the Chancellor in his speech.
Okay. But that's 1 year after potentially we've lost the training scheme.
No, well, he was actually saying the pilots would come from this April, so we do need to be getting on with it swiftly. But you are right. And I don't know the answer to this, so I'm not going to pretend to. There is an issue, which how does this new funding come in while current funding is running down, and what actually happens to the individual schemes in the middle of that transition? And I can't answer that. I know our LEPs that run a lot of that don't yet know that detail yet, but the new cash was confirmed in the CSR. Now, on the Brexit point, What do you want me to say? How can I solve that one for you, frankly?
So I'm not asking you to say anything about it. I'm aware that you probably favour the Australian deal about as much as I do. What I'm conscious of, though, in all of your budget documents and through all of your assumptions, I can't find them. And whichever way we look at it, there are lines that say there is no resilience in our budget to meet the additional costs if any schemes go over. There is no contingency for delay in any changes due to COVID-19 measures and other restrictions. And what that implies to me is if Brexit goes no deal, if we end up with that huge risks to our region, actually your budget collapses.
Well, let's just be clear. The again, this is a mix of capital and revenue. Where in the budget it says there is no contingency for COVID overruns or something like that. That is very much about the capital sums. Now, we have had this through the audit committee a number of times, and it has been agreed that, let's give you a classic example. If things went disastrously wrong, there are schemes that could be cancelled, and that is where the safety comes in terms of doing what I would probably describe as running hot. And actually, given the situation we're in, I'm not going to apologise for that, because if we weren't putting every penny in our capital plan to allocating it, people would say to me, why are you holding back? People need investments at the moment. So we're doing that with the comfort, and it does talk about the reserves in the papers for this very clearly. Now, on the revenue budget, there is definitely a risk. If there are further waves of COVID, let us say, and public transport was not to see a patronage return, and the government did not continue to underpin it, then we have a very substantial risk to our budget next year. But the decision of the leaders was that we would proceed with that risk, because again, putting it bluntly, if you don't, you end up dismantling the whole lot. And just as Councillor Holbrook has just said, you probably end up looking for false economies. So we have looked right in the eyes of the risks that are there and have decided to proceed because it maximises what good we can do, bluntly.
Okay.
And just one last thing. Sorry, go on, Karen.
Again, I suppose all I want assurance for is that somewhere in your budget process,
yes,
one of the briefings or slides we've had, we have to understand that Brexit poses major issues for this region and impact upon our budget and what we would need to be spending money on.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. The line, others are also clearly from their heads.
Can I invite
cutting out again? Actually, yeah.
Jackie Taylor in, and then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Jackie Taylor in, then Dean Carroll, then Kashmir, and then I think we will move into transport questions to try and give my internet another chance of recovery. I'll reboot it yet again.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I need to apologise. I joined this meeting late where Mr Mayor was actually talking about Friar Park. Mr Mayor, you'd recognise that I am a representative of Sandwell. Yeah, so I didn't hear that part of the discussion, but what I have picked up is with regards to the fact that there might not be enough funding for certain projects. Is that right?
Yes, and that is all laid out in the documentation, the investment programme projects that are not yet fully funded, but that is not anything to do with Friar Park, because Friar Park is not funded through that investment programme. Friar Park is a housing and land project, and that funding is secure.
Okay, thank you for that. So my question, Mr Mayor, is around the Birchley Island project. You'll be well aware of that.
I am.
And so I want to make sure that we have got all the funding, and wondered what discussion you're having with government around Birchley Island. Thank you.
Yes. So The CA has been good for its money for Berkeley Island for 2 years, to put it extremely straightforwardly. When we had the Transforming Cities funding, which was fully devolved transport funding, we allocated, and this all went to the board, we allocated, I think it was 7 million off the top of my head, you're stretching my memory, to Berkeley Island, and that money is still there. And then obviously Sandwell Council, a Black Country LEP, are other contributors to that. But our share of the money has never been changed. So, and then the answer to the question about discussions with government, it's very timely. I personally haven't discussed it, but the Managing Director of Transport for the West Midlands has discussed that project with Department for Transport this very week. But to be really clear, the CA money is there. We need the other funding contributors to come together for it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Kashmir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lisa, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here from the Uncombined Authority and also the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee. Just a couple of things from me. First of all, it is welcome that you've managed to get the proposed budget to it being balanced. That is, of course, a good sign of cooperation across the board. But obviously, with my generation having been hit the most by COVID and young people's, and obviously the terrifying scale of youth unemployment, which is beginning to really come across, don't you think that these savings that are earmarked across the board potentially sends the wrong message and shows it being almost a Mark II of austerity? Also, of course, I will say that some of the stuff I've mentioned about young people and youth-related schemes is good. But what else is also there? If there are young people watching this call, what would you say to them in terms of what can they expect from? What can they expect? How can they benefit from this? And then also one final one would be also knowing that the mayoral election dates are fixed, even obviously circumstances this year has meant, even though obviously circumstances this year were extraordinary. How is it possible, or I think practical from everybody's point of view, that funding for next year's mayoral election is not yet fully in place in terms of that 3.6 million?
Okay, I think just so Linda knows, the last bit about the election, I'm going to let Linda answer that because I think probably people will understand that's the last thing I should be involved in. Okay, so 3 parts to your question. Were you on the line when I said in terms of balancing next year's budget, we have not cut any operational services? So I don't think there is any risk of people saying you've cut, for example, any of your skills activities when you should have been making more of them. The way we've balanced the operational budget is looking for savings in all of our support functions. It has not been about any cut to the operational budget. But the truthful answer, Kashmir, about this is that our budget isn't the critical piece here. This is a classic example of what cash can we leverage in from other places and then do a good job at pulling together. And so actually the real answer of scale here has to come from government funding. And if we were having this discussion in Manchester or Liverpool or anyone else, the same answer would be given. So yes, we've got our 124 million for adult education. We'll use that to best effect. But the really big schemes, Kickstart, obviously, to your point about what can young people look forward to, that's there. The whole sort of commitment around national retraining. We lobby, we win the cash, we've won more than other areas, but ultimately it's government money. So the digital retraining schemes that are there, the construction retraining schemes, that's Construction Gateway, ultimately that's come from government as well. So you can see the point I'm making. This isn't about what we do with our relatively small operational budget here. The real power of the combined authority, as the chair acknowledged earlier on, is for us to influence and get capital and revenue funding that then we can use for our citizens. And then to your last, what was your last? Oh, your last point was about the elections. So I ought to let Linda answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Kashmir. So as we've discussed previously, when we've been through the budget slides, obviously, yes, we are estimating the costs at 3.6 million at the minute, and we'll continue to work with officers regionally to work through those figures. This is a national issue for us. This isn't just a West Midlands issue. This is about us working and lobbying on behalf of all mayoral combined authorities into government to secure this funding. So please sort of rest assured that we are lobbying on a national level for the government to fund the mayoral elections nationally. The first and the original mayoral election, we funded through the use of our devolved gain share funding. Ideally, obviously, from my perspective, I would absolutely avoid that at all costs, because actually that's there for investment. So we are continuing to lobby for that money on a national basis.
Okay, not Linda for you to comment clearly, but it has to be a concern to this committee, and again is an example that runs throughout some of your budget comments in the presentation we got. We're 20 weeks away from an election and we have a dirty, great big hole in our budget because the government hasn't actually let us know whether they're going to be prepared to fund the mayoral election. And there has to be a worry. You know, I believe massively in regional government, but we don't seem to have a government who actually understands we need to be able to govern. And again, you know, I think it is something we would really, if there's anything we as a scrutiny can do, how, you know, shocked and appalled we are at the government's incompetence on this one.
Can I make one observation, Chair, because I don't want the committee to be inappropriately alarmed about this. So absolutely everything that Linda said, of course, is right. My responsibility as the current chair of the WMCA is to ensure that we do not put ourselves in a financially exposed position. So should the government not come through with that cash, there will be a contingency way of covering that. And that has been again explained to leaders. But obviously, the negotiation with the government means that we want to have that in our back pocket, not declare it. But I think the committee can be reassured that we do have a contingency for that.
But again, it comes back to, doesn't it, where local government is reeling under the costs of COVID, where we're already putting so much revenue into the combined authority. If there's any thought that contingency comes from much needed investment areas, that has to be a concern. And I'm conscious we need to move on to transport questions, given I have transport colleagues.
I was just going to say I'm sorry, but I missed the whole piece of the remainder of your answer, Chair.
Sorry, I will hand Kathy.
Yeah, do you want to take just Councillor Carroll's final question and then we'll move straight on to the transport?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Question is back to the beginning of the discussion and debate this afternoon, really around regeneration. And I'll take the example that you used because it's one that seems to be quite far along in Phoenix 10 in Walsall. And perhaps you could give the committee a little bit of reassurance and a brief explanation as to moving forward, how when the combined authority goes on to bring further schemes up to this kind of stage, what the learning from Phoenix 10, how that will make future projects the combined authority undertakes much more efficient and enable us to do more with the money that we have in the budget.
What interesting question. So I think this might sound blindingly simple, Dean, but I think it's an important point just to log, because one of the underlying questions here is this the appropriate use of public money? And I think I can look you all in the eye and say this would not be happening without the CA having this cash and prioritising it in this way. and this, as Councillor Samra will confirm, is a vast site. I think it's 32 football pitches, and it's been derelict for over 25 years. So there are lots of stuff about exactly how it's happened. Could it have gone faster? But the helicopter lesson, and I feel this very strongly, is that in a region like this, we are going to need to continue to spend public money to make these schemes viable. And just to pick up something the chair said a little bit ago, it sounds as though we're, building buildings. Yes, we are. There will be industrial premises there, but those are about new jobs. It's likely to be 1,000 new jobs on that site. And so just to prove that I really do believe this, yesterday we had a discussion with the Community Secretary, Robert Jenrick, about reflections on post-COVID recovery. And I was making this point to him, that in some of the more economically challenged areas of the country, of which obviously the Black Country is one because of its history, we are going to need to continue to spend money in this way. Otherwise, bluntly put, they will continue to be derelict, because it is not possible for a return for a private sector investor to come good, given the scale of the cleanup that was required. And that might seem a simple point, but I actually think in public policy terms, it's a really important one for us not to let go.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. So if we now move on to the dedicated transport scrutiny section of this budget meeting, and I think it's since we've convened the transport scrutiny committee, we felt it would be really valuable to have a specific transport slot, certainly given the size of the budget and given the pressures that it is clearly under. I've got a number of members of the committee on the line, but I am also comfortable for other committee members to ask transport related questions only for this section up till about 1:45. If I could just kick off, Mayor, by just asking you about, and it does cross-cut both the transport budget and the general budgets, but if I could just draw you to the slides 23, 4 and 5, where we've had our attention drawn to deliverables, so broken down into statutory activity, funded to do activity and discretionary activity. So obviously under those, the majority of the local choice discretionary activity actually falls under transport.
Yes.
Now, given the real pressures to the transport budget, I appreciate that the reserves are going to plug the gap for next year. But after that, the real pressures on the transport budget, which will be from the transport levy and then the policy decisions that have been taken around concessions. So at what point in the coming 12 months are we going to be looking at making those difficult decisions about whether we look at the local choice decisions, which actually will impact on some of our most the hardest hit communities through COVID and most economically hardest hit communities, versus the difficult positions that the local authorities are in with any proposed increase to the transport levy. So it's really at what point it's making those very difficult decisions.
Okay, so everyone can see this is difficult, and I'm sure there is political unity around this. No one wants to have to eat into the concession offer that is at the moment. So, and I want to defend it just as much as I'm sure you do, Kathy. The answer to your question, because the leaders discussed this at their last meeting with me and the deputy mayor, was that we would probably come to this in the early summer. Now, there are two reasons for that. One is blindingly obvious and one needs a wee bit more thinking through. The blindingly obvious one is these tricky political calls, and it's only right that there's a new mayor with or there's a re-elected mayor or a new mayor, whichever it is, with a clear mandate to see that through. But the second reason is much, much more financially logical. The big thing we need to know is what is the patronage on our network. And we will only know that when we know how we're recovering from COVID. This problem only exists because the patronage has fallen so sharply, and therefore it's all running at a huge loss. Now, if the government continue to make good that loss, and to be fair to them, they have made good pretty much all of it so far this year. If they continue to make good that loss, the decisions will be much easier. But if they do not, and the patronage does not recover, then we have a difficult set of decisions. And we genuinely will not know the answer to that until we see how we're coming out of COVID and what the recovery profile is.
Thank you. I mean, my understanding was there was a potential deficit before we hit COVID. So I don't, and whilst COVID is certainly a huge factor, and nobody can deny that, there was certainly a gap before we got to COVID. So if we can move on, then I'll bring in other people. So Councillor Boston.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Can I start off by welcoming Mr. Mayor's call of the West Midlands being returned to Tier 2. I think that's significantly important for the financial and overall well-being of the region. And I'm grateful to the Mayor for recognising at the last question time that we've been treated, frankly, shamefully by the government. That's got nothing to do with party politics. I just think generally London, Westminster, Whitehall has not treated our region well at all when it comes to how the support packages have been put out in terms of COVID. But I've got two questions, if I may, regarding transport. Firstly, I'm really concerned, and in light of what Mr. Mayor said earlier around the fact that difficult decisions may have to be made, I'm really concerned that accessible transport for people with disabilities, for example, the Ring and Ride service, will become the sacrificial lamb for these funding cuts that we're going to inevitably see coming across the road. So I just want to know, Mr. Mayor, what are your thoughts on accessible transport? Will you be safeguarding it? Do you recognise the pivotal role it plays for people with disabilities across the region? And secondly, on transport, you recall last year, Mr. Mayor, you promised that new buses will be coming their way for Sandwell, and I pointed out that Birmingham City Centre has far better buses than us. Is that still on the cards? Thank you.
Lovely. I think I'm going to let your description of government support go without me responding. I'm sure I did not use that word about the government, though. I can't believe you.
No, I used that. I didn't directly quote you there, Mr.
Anyway, I will let that go by and answer the two questions. So accessible transport. I can be absolutely categoric about this. I understand how critical it is, and the evidence that we understand that is, I hope people feel this is fair. When the previous operator went bust, to put it bluntly, it was TfWM that stepped in to bridge it until a new operator came. So that was a choice we made, the board under my leadership, and I think that's the clear evidence that we A, understand it, and B, were prepared to put our money where our mouth was. Now, the total cost, roughly 6.6 million. We have got to defend that, but to be really clear, it will be there in the budget, and it's in fully at the moment, and I would do all I can to protect it. But I cannot give anyone a cast iron guarantee. But I will do everything we can to protect that, because it's so important, as you say, Councillor Boston. Then, in terms of Sandwell and the buses. So National Express are continuing with their policy of not buying another diesel bus for the West Midlands at all, and upgrading steadily. We will still be the first place outside London to have got all of our fleet to clean vehicles. And of course, their proposal now is to move through the electrification of that fleet, which we've seen in Birmingham and in Coventry. In terms of Sandwell, the single biggest investment, of course, was the 82-87 Dudley Road fleet through the middle of, well, not actually through the middle of West Brom, through parts of Sandwell and out to Dudley. So yeah, that programme will continue, Councillor Boston. And I actually think credit to National Express, they have been very far-sighted over this. And if you look at our fleet against other parts of the country, we're in a good position.
Thank you. I've got now Councillor Lisa Trickett indicating, followed by Councillor Cade. We can't hear you, Lisa. Shall I move to Councillor Cade while you try to sort out?
Sorry, I thought you said Lynn somebody. Sorry.
Councillor Trickett.
yeah. Sorry, I'm so rarely call myself councillor that it always comes as a shock when somebody invites me in as that. I welcome commitments to accessible transport. I suppose one of the things I'm interested in here is, again, the power of the combined authority and how it could be doing things differently with transport. Accessible transport is an essential part of our region, both in terms of transporting children with additional needs about, as well as the wider area. It is an area that has huge budgetary constraints for many local authorities, and if I'm honest, in Birmingham's case, is not done well at all. What I'm intrigued about at times, and it comes back as well to my question, I suppose, about homelessness and the fact in this region we must spend £20 million a year on putting people in bed and breakfast when we could be investing in new housing. Is the combined authority taking time out to look at new models where you could combine some of your special educational needs transport contracts with the assisted travel to extend it? And then my further point is, it was something that was raised by the Young Combined Authority this time last year, and picks up on Penny's point. For too many young people, I have a 16-year-old who didn't sit her GCSEs, and I saw some of the young people she was at school with not go on to apprenticeships, not go on to training, because just that experience of not having exams. What stopped some of them going to their colleges, though, was they couldn't afford the bus fare. And again, one of the things the Young Combined Authority have called for is subsidised free travel for 16 to 18-year-olds. Are you going to be costing in the future policy considerations for 16 to 18 free travel?
Okay, so on the first question, it can be a very simple one-word answer. Yes, TFWM are actively looking at whether there is a better solution, which somehow, and please, I don't want anyone to think this is definitely going to happen for good or better, but they are examining whether there's a better solution between accessible transport and also the local authority provision for travel to school. So yes, that is an active consideration. Yeah. On the question of 16 to 18-year-old, obviously, one of the concessions we have, and the cost of it is listed here. We have recently, or 3 years ago now, in my first year, we introduced the half price travel for apprentices and trainees. At the moment, there is no intention to extend to free travel for 16 to 18-year-olds. I know some on the call will be disappointed by that, but you can all see there are choices here, and we are already at the limit of what is affordable with the levy. There could be, when the choices come this next summer, we could include that as an option, but then we would have to find even more money rather than less money. So there is not that proposal at the moment. One thing I would just also point out, because this is I mentioned this because this is an area where another concession we have which isn't being well used, actually, the Workwise concession. This is very important. People getting into a new job, particularly young people, free travel for the first 3 months. That is also there, and I don't think we're making enough of that at this time of incredible change, sadly, in the job market.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Cade, followed by Councillor Bateman, and followed by Cashmere from the Young Combined Authority. Councillor Cade.
Thank you very much. We're all aware of congestion zones and the need for cars and buses to become electric, but I was reading recently that there are little or no mechanics. There's very little work going on to train mechanics to service or whatever it is they will be doing with electric vehicles. And I just wondered whether that was on the radar or if it was an opportunity for apprenticeships.
It's a brilliant point. And actually, there are lots of similar points. There aren't many people trained to do retrofitting for green. You know, that's another area very similar. So, yes, it definitely is. And that would be a perfect thing for our skills team to work through. So, yeah, one of the things we are offering to do, again, is to be that glue to bring about more of these really practical, much needed skills. So, yes, thank you for the nudge. And I'll tell you what I'll do. It's the only time I've said this. I will get you a more formal update to that as to exactly what's happening already, because I know the skills team are on it, but I don't know the detail.
Thank you.
Councillor Bateman.
Yes, clearly we're facing quite a difficult set of decisions, and I hope that the Mayor and the government are able to help to provide the resources to cover what we do now, as well as the great wish list for the future. But the question I would like to ask you, Mr. Mayor, whilst coaches are not part and parcel of the combined authority's overall control, nevertheless, they make huge amounts of benefit to leisure, the nighttime economy, schools and the like. And we've seen one of our coach operators in Coventry recently go into administration, which affected the local bus service, which of course yourselves had to find TFWM, to pick up and run with it. The question I would like to ask you is, are you giving any support to these local coach operators in their quest to get the funding in that they're not getting at the moment, or certainly not in the West Midlands? They suddenly have been given £6 million by the Scottish Government over the last couple of days. But are you doing anything to help them in their bid to try to get government to recognise that they need help straight away?
So what? I'm not sure whether you'll consider this a yes or a no, actually, Councillor Bateman, but let me tell you what we did. You're right. Some coach operators do actually provide critical services for us. I'll give you a good example. A lot of the network in Solihull is run by a local coach operator, Landfly, the bus. And what we did right from day one of COVID, even though people were not carrying passengers, we continued to pay exactly what they were all expecting. So in that sense of practical support, we honoured all of our bills. And that would be the same for your operator in Coventry as well. So we definitely continued to put our money on the table, and their financial plight was not because of anything the WMCA or TFWM did. What we haven't done is offer any additional cash beyond that, but we've made sure the cash that we were responsible for, we honoured.
Chair, can I just come back on that, please? I'm not so much expecting a cash payment from the combined authority. My issue is one of leadership, really, is about what you're doing to help those, and they're in the main private coach operators. They are private coach operators. They're operating the West Midlands counter, who are desperately trying hard to get government to accept their arguments about their need for some financial support. None of the coach operators have really had any financial packages in terms of furlough and the like. It's one of the leadership, and really, I was just wondering if they've been to you and asked you, and if they haven't, would you go and speak with, I suppose it'd be the Confederation of Passenger Transport, to see what you can do to help them argue their case for government for support. Otherwise, we're going to find all these 100-year-old coach companies like Johnson's in Warwickshire and Coach Travel up here in Wolverhampton going to the wall. And they will not be there when we want them, when COVID is finally set on its back foot. It's a really critical issue.
So the answer, of course, is be happy to talk to any sector. I think it actually goes back to what Councillor Boston said. Which is part of my role is to point out to government and hopefully to lobby and persuade them when parts of our economy are not getting the appropriate support. And I would I don't want to in any way take away from your question, but they're not in a unique position because they are effectively a business that is, for all intents and purposes, closed, even though they're not legally closed, particularly with the tier 3 arrangements. So I would be very happy to include them in all that we are doing around that more general point about supporting businesses in tier 3, because they cannot trade as they would previously have traded. So yeah, I'm up for that conversation. I do know, by the way, they've had conversations with TFWM again, but not directly with me.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we'll see what we can do to
Yeah,
try to
that's
get
fine.
them the conversation with it, because it's crucial that we've got them about when we come out of this damned pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bateman. Kashmir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Baton, and to Mr. Mayor. Of course, first of all, would definitely agree on the point of accessible travel, and very much hope that we all collectively go gun and fist to protect it at all costs, knowing of the crucial service it delivers to people with disabilities across the region. Of course, I've got to express my immediate disappointment at the 16 to 18-year-olds not being renewed, but I'm sure that there'll be no doubt hopefully if things do re-emerge once we're hopefully out of the crisis, that it could be something to look towards getting back up and running in the future, knowing of how critical it has meant, knowing how critical of a lifeline it has been for many young people across the region. Of course, got to first of all welcome the £800 million from 2022. It is a really good step in the right direction. But of course, with it not coming till 2022 and passenger numbers having plummeted, and it's still only very slowly from the looks of things having got back up, going back up in terms of numbers using particularly the railways. I just curious as to what you think TFWM's viability in terms of all these schemes are going forward and at the present moment. And then finally, I'm sure the Chancellor for West Midlands Youth Forum would very much like to, when it comes to say these difficult decisions you're going to, whomever is the mayor next summer, got to make. I'm pretty sure the TFWM Youth Forum would very much like a chat on particularly on the concessionary schemes.
Okay, Kashmir, thank you. Just to say, first of all, I hope I didn't misdescribe it. There's nothing being taken away from 16 to 18-year-olds. So when you said renewed, we are sustaining our half-price travel for trainees and apprenticeships and all that. There's absolutely no change to the current offer. I think the question I was asked was whether it be extended to completely free for all. And that, again, is keeping it as it is for now. So nothing's been taken away at all.
Do you forgive me? I must have misheard you there.
Yeah,
sorry,
okay.
there, Mr. Mayor.
It's important, no, because, you know, the whole point of this budget is we are sustaining the current offer. And a lot of hard work has had to be done to get to that point. OK, right now then, so you just on the recovery of numbers, you're absolutely right. It's much slower on the rail. That's only about 21%, of buses up to 60%. But the government are completely underpinning the rail service at the moment. So again, there is no prospect, as long as government sustains it, that will come away. It is effectively a nationalised industry now, and government is maintaining all of the timetable as it currently is. To your question, though, about the viability of TFWM, of course, there's financial challenges. We can see that. We've described them very honestly. But there is absolutely no question in my mind that TFWM is viable. And far more than that, it is critical to this region. And let's just be clear, it is investing more capital than has ever been invested in this region. And it is providing all of these subsidised services as well for the good of our citizens, back to where we started. So it is absolutely essential that we strengthen or continue to strengthen TFWM as we've done over recent years.
Thank you. I've got two final questions for this section, and then we will wrap up the transport question. So we've got Peter Fowler, followed by Jackie Taylor. So Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Andy. First of all, I'd like to say that it was pleasing to hear, because I think I kind of misheard, if I may say, on the 16 to 18-year-olds, where I thought it was going to be lost, because that's why I raised my hand to see what help. But I'm so pleased. Thank you for that. And can I just add from something from a bit earlier on, if I may, is to say thank you very much about the social housing. I know it was some time ago, But I was grateful to Lisa, because Lisa and I did have a conversation in our last meeting saying that in the document it didn't allude to the section on social housing. And as you quite rightly said, Andy, there's a document coming back to show that. But the question, and I'm pleased to hear about the transport, the accessible transport, that was also good news to hear. So thank you for that. Continuing on accessibility would be a little bit on the park and ride, because we're trying to link up park and ride to Metro, to obviously to try and encourage more people from outside of Birmingham, etc., and other areas to actually be able to have the opportunity to say, well, I don't need to take my car in now, I can go by to the car, to the park and ride, and then continue on by Metro or other means. Thank you.
It's fascinating last question, Peter, because it illustrates how the world of COVID has just knocked so much sideways. So, of course, we're just about to open the Longbridge Park and Ride, brilliant investment, and we would have been coming forward with other schemes. But, of course, they're all predicated on charging, and that's how you pay for the capital. And if people are not using the network, obviously the maths falls apart. So it's becoming much, much more difficult. However, I am determined, we're only talking to Laura Schoaf about this in the last couple of days, actually. We're determined to bring the next large scale proposal forward. But it's very difficult when the maths of it is suddenly sideswiped as it has been. But celebrate Longbridge. Yeah.
Thank you. Very final question then is from Councillor Taylor. Jackie.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Mr. Mayor, I understand that you can't speak about the election that's going to take place next year. I'm really interested to know that during your tenure as Mayor, what are the 3 things that you are most proud of with regards to transport? Thank you.
I'm most proud of the fact that before COVID, we had got increasing use of public transport in all of our modes, tram, train, bus. And that's pretty remarkable, actually, because that shows that the thing that we always talked about, the jargon word modal shift, making public transport a better choice, it was happening. Really good. The second thing I'm really proud of is that we have for 4 years held bus fares, because for 40 years we had ever increasing fares, and then people scratched their head and said, why is the service becoming less popular? So for 4 years, flat fares. And for a lot of people, given some of the concessions that came in, we managed to reduce them. And then the third thing I'm probably most proud of is that we have brought some capital expenditure to scheme. We're making them happen, schemes that for 30 years people talked about and nothing happened. And obviously the best example of that is the Black Country Metro. The press from the 1990s, Express and Star had it in, nothing happened. There'd been a Conservative mayor for a relatively short period of time and the cash was secured. And I genuinely think that whatever else happens in the future, people using that will think something good came from the WMCA in that period. And yeah, it's an interesting word, Jackie, thank you. I do genuinely feel proud that we've been able to make 1 or 2 changes. But there's probably an underlying point as well. It's been brilliant teamwork that's brought that about. The local authorities have been brilliantly collaborative. We've all had the same sort of mission, and actually TFWM has been really well led. And I have to say, we have also secured a lot of cash from the government as well, back to one of the earlier themes. So yeah, there's a few things to be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Just before I hand back over to Councillor Trickett to sum up the budget question time, I just want to make sort of a point really about the choices that will have to be made. And I think we have to really bear in mind that if we make choices that do not allow people to travel cheaply, to keep social connectivity, to be able to access the job and the skills and the training market, none of the other things in the region will thrive. The economy won't thrive and our citizens won't thrive. So it's just a real point that when we come to make the difficult decisions around policy and around reductions or whatever else it is that we might have to think about, people's connectivity across the West Midlands is key to the economy and key to social inclusion. So I'll just hand over now to Councillor Trickett to sum up the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Cathy, and brilliant put. And again, it comes back to a sort of debate Penny and I were having, that it has to be, politics is all about priorities, and it has to be what will make a difference for the communities we serve in our region, and valuing on that. Andy, are there some closing remarks you would seek to make before I do?
I'll only say one sentence, which is thank you for the conversations. I think we've covered some important stuff, and rest assured, I understand the point about these concessions, and we will do all we humanly can to defend them when the conversations come this summer. It's extremely well put, Councillor Baton, and that is indeed why we've laid it all out to be transparent about the situation, but we're all determined to defend them best we can.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. And I think really what Councillor Baton was referencing was, as much actually when we look at our priorities, actually we may well need to think differently and look at how we subsidise further transport for young people against actually some of the shinier projects that government and others wish to pursue. And again, some of us sit on railway schemes that have been 20 years campaigning, and one day we hope there will be a complete budget for those also. I think in terms of what we've discussed today, I think the important thing is in terms of actually moving forward in having an honest conversation about the absolute vital need for a sustainable funding base for the Metro Combined Authority areas. It cannot continue where we have to spend so much time bidding for government money on Whitehall knows best, when actually we know what will make a difference for our region. And what we end up with is, in effect, combined authority that's no more than a vessel where funding passes through, and what we're not able to do is properly connect. I think you will have heard we still remain very concerned about some of the priorities. I was just looking at the revenue budget, and it's about that balance, isn't it? You have £0.1 million against inclusive growth, but you have 0.7 million against the West Midlands Growth Company. Now, if you don't grow for the benefit of the citizens we serve, what is the purpose of growth? And again, I think this is what we are actually committed to. How can we ensure that the added value that a combined authority can bring, and how it can secure a funding base actually allows that funding to be targeted in a way that makes a difference? And I think that's something we all need to occupy some time. There's been some successes, no doubt about that, but equally the shift has not actually come in terms of resources down to the communities that we serve. And I think for many of us, there has to be a remaining. Can I apologise to my colleagues about my absolutely awful Wi-Fi, and I will find somewhere else to hold the next meeting. I don't know where. Can I thank everyone else for their contributions? Are there any other final points from anyone before we formally just thank the Mayor, and we will move into just a brief private session to look at how we communicate any issues arising from today? Jackie.
Not a question, Chair, just a statement. Local jobs for local people.
Thank you, Jackie. And you still haven't answered my question about Moseley Station, Andy, but I will write.
That's because you never asked it. I've been waiting for it for 2 hours. So the point, let me just very quickly answer that. So you will have some more good news today on that. So the point is very simple, that that project is going ahead at speed with all the hurdles being knocked down. We haven't got all the money yet, but we've got a good chunk of it. and we will get all the money, but you can commit to a project as this documentation shows. Well, you always do with transport projects, well before you get the full funding. It never works like that. It's about getting sufficient to get going, and then it comes in. You can hold me to that.
£25 million whole is quite a lot, given you've only got 7 so far.
We will see whether we will watch this space. The full business case is now lodged with government, and I am very confident that that will come through. But that happens with every single rail project like this, or every single major capital project. And if we didn't do that, we'd be paralysed and achieve nothing. And may I say, that's been our history. We achieve nothing.
Okay. Well, I will be hanging my station pictures with pride if it comes through.
Lovely. We will wait for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you also, colleagues, for your time, and Mr. Deputy Mayor